When I say, what if Ataturk didn't exist, I don't mean Mustafa Kemal, I mean the mantle of Ataturk. What if there was no father of the Turks? What if Turkey was never born? Turkey's predecessor, the Ottoman Empire, ceased to exist after the First World War, losing its colonies and its defining feature, the Sultan. They almost even lost most of mainland Anatolia itself, including the ancient city of Constantinople. The country was saved due to the efforts of Mustafa Kemal, later nicknamed Ataturk, and his motivated followers. Ataturk's nationalist government pushed the Greeks out of Anatolia and negotiated the withdrawal of their Entente powers. But what if that man never had the chance to save his country from the humiliating peace treaty? Maybe he was killed in battle or captured by the enemy, or maybe he never became the man who he was in the first place. For one reason or another, Ataturk is not there when Turkey needed him most. What will the next decade hold for the Ottoman Empire? Will they rise from the ashes of the First World War, or will all memory of their glory fade away? Watch till the end to find out. The Ottoman Empire didn't perform very well in the First World War, even though they had undergone major reforms after the humiliation in the Libyan and Balkan Wars. They had a long way to go from being cured of the title, the sick man of Europe. And in an alternative history without Ataturk, the Ottoman Empire will be even less reformed. They'll still lose to the Balkan League and Italy like what happened in our timeline. Jumping to World War I, I don't think the Ottomans will be weakened that much, so they lose Gallipoli or the Caucasus campaign to Russia, but there will be changes on a macro level that still add up to worse Ottoman performance with more casualties and equipment loss. The Ottomans surrendered a month after the collapse of Bulgaria, because with Bulgaria gone, the road to Constantinople was open to the Entente powers. Seeing the writing on the wall, the Ottomans signed the Mudros Armistice. The armistice demanded from the Ottomans the demobilization of their army, the demilitarization of the Dardanelles and Bosphorus Straits, and establishment of a neutral international zone there, unrestricted use of ports and railways to the Allied armies, and the right of the Entente powers to seize control over parts of the country in case of emergency. I believe that this clause was a prelude to the attempted colonization of Anatolia by the Entente powers. Britain and France were already negotiating spheres of influence in Anatolia since 1915. Greece wanted to realize their Megali idea, and Italy wanted to justify its participation in the First World War. All those countries will have the chance to get what they wanted from the Ottoman Empire after the signing of the Treaty of Sèvres. And if you thought Versailles was harsh, you don't know about Sèvres. It did not demand much in the way of reparations, but in everything else, the Ottoman Empire would be good at. Let's review this original map from 1920, depicting the territorial changes from the Treaty of Sèvres. As you can see in the zoomed out minimap, the Ottomans will lose all their Middle Eastern territories and the northeastern part of Anatolia, which had a sizable Armenian population. On the main map, we can see that Kurdish, Greek and other minorities are to hold a plebiscite in the future on what nation they want to be part of. The area around the Dardanelles and Bosphorus Straits, including Constantinople, was to become a demilitarized international territory. You can also see that the Greek and Italian borders were to be moved in their favor. The Greeks getting some islands and parts of Thrace, and the Italians getting some more islands. You might think this is not that bad. It's similar to what happened to Germany, right? They were forced to decolonize and cede some core territories. Well, the thing is, this map doesn't show the full picture. Remember how I told you there were negotiations over spheres of influence in the Ottoman Empire, even before the Ottoman Empire lost the war? Well, here is a map of the zones of influence agreed upon by the Treaty of Sèvres. Probably the first thing you can see is the massive Italian zone of influence, which basically takes over the Ottoman Mediterranean coast, which is a vital economic part of the empire. France was to expand its influence north, and still acquired Syrian mandates. The zone was also to include a big part of the Kurdish provinces holding a plebiscite. The west part of the Kurdish plebiscite zone was to be under French control, and the east part would go to the British. Now we can see that the Turkish state was to be reduced to the Black Sea coast and the areas around Ankara, which at the time wasn't even that big of a city. This was done to increase British and French influence over the Middle East, by destroying the multicultural Ottoman Empire using the excuse of self-determination. If you want to learn more about the Treaty of Sèvres, watch my video about it after you finish this one. In our timeline, Ataturk formed a rival government and rejected the treaty, which started the war with Greece in the west, Armenia in the east, France in the south, loyalist separatists spread around the country, and the British troops around Constantinople. This was called the War of Turkish Independence, since they were technically declaring independence from the old Ottoman Empire. This is a zoomed out faction map of the conflict, and yes, Turkey won. Now, contrary to what some Turkish sources might tell you, the war wasn't won via Ataturk's sheer Turkishness and dark magic. In reality, Turkey only fought the Greeks and Armenians and some Ottoman loyalists, since the other powers were preoccupied with quelling unrest. In the case of the British and French, they were dealing with their newly acquired Middle Eastern colonies, and in the case of Italy, they were collapsing domestically. After the Ataturkist government defeated the Greeks, they demanded that the international zone come under Turkish control. This was known as the Çanak crisis. The only reason it did not lead to war is that no one on the Entente side wanted to support the British. The British population, and even some generals, were also against the war, so the crisis was resolved in Turkey's favor. How would the aftermath of the signing of Treaty of Sevres go without Ataturk? I don't think the Turks will be able to organize a united government to oppose the treaty. In fact, Turkey will probably fall into a three-way civil war between the loyalist government which supported the treaty and nationalist and communist elements which opposed it. The map of the civil war would look something like this. You can see that the communists are hugging the Black Sea coast. This is not a coincidence, since the communist Turkish government will be propped up by the Bolshevik regime in Russia, which will send equipment and other supplies through the Black Sea. The nationalists will base their government in Ankara, like they did in our timeline. The loyalist faction will be the weakest one, holding some rural areas around the French zone of influence and the international demilitarized zone. Like in our timeline, Greece and Armenia will go to war, but instead of one Turkey, they'll be fighting against two, that being the nationalist and communist governments of Turkey. Sadly for the Turks, fighting two Turkeys which are fighting each other is easier than fighting one united Turkey, so the Greeks will be able to reach Ankara, unlike in our timeline. Seeing that the nationalists are collapsing, the communists will offer a truce to Greece, but they won't recognize the Greek annexation of Anatolian lands. I think the Greeks will accept this offer, because after defeating they wouldn't think Turkey would be strong enough to reclaim their Anatolian lands later. Unfortunately for Armenia, abandoned by their Greek ally, they will be fighting a war on two fronts. One front against the communist Turks in the west and another against the Bolsheviks in the east. Both of the communist nations would want to reclaim the territory lost in their own respective civil war, so Armenia will be split according to the pre-World War I borders of the Ottoman and Russian Empire. Remember the Çanak crisis? I think something like that would still happen. Unlike in our timeline, Turkey will probably not win this crisis. This time, Britain will have the support of Italy and France, because they would not want to open the door for communism into the Mediterranean. Greece would also support Britain, because in this timeline, they want the Greco-Turkish war and their army isn't destroyed. I can see some border fighting happening, but ultimately Turkey backs down and the neutral zone stays a de facto British puppet. Now that the fighting is over, let's review Turkey and the Soviet Union situation. Turkey is in a much weaker state because of the land loss and the casualties taken in the civil war. I think communist Turkey will not allow itself to be split into spheres of influence. They will still lose some Mediterranean cities to Italy and parts of southern Anatolia to France and Britain. The Turkish brand of communism will be different than the Russian, probably less focused on heavy industry and secularism and more on worker liberation and equal ethnic rights. Given enough time, multiculturalism will make this Turkish state even more stable than the Turkey in our timeline. Turkey would probably be a satellite of Moscow until they begin to recover from the national crisis. This was the end of the First World War for them. On the other hand, the Soviet Union would be in a much greater position. They would have more influence in the Balkans and would be closer to controlling the Straits, which was always one of Russia's strategic desires. Around 1928, Soviet economic support has recovered Turkey's economy. Turkey would have also lessened external political influence in the country and greatly increased their military capacity. The Turkish military buildup will start an arms race with the Greeks, who would be worried about their Anatolian holdings. But unlike Turkey, who had external support from the Soviets, the Greeks had to take loans to support their military buildup. The Greeks, seeing as they are beginning to be buried in debt, would decide they had to neutralize communist Turkey now. They would approach the English, Italians and French. The French and British public would be anti-war and they would only offer the Greeks secret support. But Italy, now led by Mussolini, would back Greece into the war, hoping to gain more territory in Turkey. This war can go a million different ways, but due to the defensive terrain of Anatolia, and Italy and Greece's difficulty to supply their army, I think Turkey has the advantage. Nevertheless, let's go to a possible scenario how the war would play out. In the spring of 1930, Greece will launch a surprise attack against Turkey, managing to imprison some of their border forces. The Italians would join the war on the Greek side shortly after, beginning an assault from their holdings in Anatolia. But success for the anti-Turkish coalition would end soon as communist Turkey began mobilizing and the summer heat set in. Turkey would launch a surprise winter offensive with the help of Siberian expeditionary forces from the Russians. When 1931 rolls around, Greece would have lost some of its territorial gains and the front would have stabilized. The anti-Turkish coalition was getting desperate, so they had to change their plan. The Greeks and Italians would launch a combined invasion from the south. The Turks would move forces to meet the assault, but that played into the Italian and Greek plans. The Greeks and Italians would violate the neutral zone, moving divisions through it to invade Turkey. This would turn the Western public against the Italians and mainly the Greeks, who were now seen not as protectors from communism, but as a warmongering state. The scandal would also cause the Soviets to threaten a withdrawal from the League of Nations and joining the war on communist Turkey's side. The communist nations would demand the neutral zone be ceded to Turkey, and with no support for war, the British and the League of Nations would have to oblige. The Turks would scramble to launch a surprise attack from their newly acquired territories. The attack would succeed, and they would manage to encircle a majority of Italian and Greek forces. Red Turkey would launch an offensive in the Greek holdings in Anatolia and Thrace. With Greek morale at an all-time low, they would fall back. The Italians, seeing the Greeks collapse, would choose to sign a peace treaty, giving up their Anatolian holdings. Turkey would reclaim all of Anatolia from the Greeks and continue to push through Thrace. After the successful capture of Thessaloniki, there would be an ultimatum from the League of Nations for Turkey to sign a peace and revert the Greek borders to what they were after the Second Balkan War, but Communist Turkey will call their bluff and continue the war. In this timeline, this will be the unofficial end of the League of Nations. From now on, the League of Nations would be seen as more of a formal institution. Communist Turkey will still be embargoed by the Western powers, but that wouldn't faze them much, because their main trading partner was the Soviet Union anyways, which would place no embargoes on them. The Greeks would capitulate in 1933, and to everyone's surprise, Turkey would annex all of the Greek territories and proclaim themselves as the Union of Anatolian and Balkan Socialist Republics, or WABSR. But let's continue calling them Turkey, because it's easier and doesn't sound weird. A few months into 1933, there would be a communist coup in Bulgaria, instigated by the Soviet Union and Communist Turkey, which now had borders with Bulgaria. The new communist government in Bulgaria would be a puppet of the Comintern, and after they solidified their control over the nation, a referendum would be held on if to join the WABSR Union, and of course, 99% of Bulgarians would vote yes. The real number would probably be around 10 to 25%. Because Bulgaria had a lot of socialists at the time, they also had a large Turkish and Muslim minority. In this world, the Western imperialist powers and the fascist powers in Central Europe are going closer due to the communist threat in the east. How will this world deal with the growing ambitions and power of Germany while containing the communist threat? Is war on the brink of eruption, or will World War II be avoided altogether? If you're interested in the answers of those questions, leave a comment asking for part 2. And while you're down there, consider subscribing if you don't want to miss out on new videos.